Hi, today we are going to take a look at how to use wear and tear and all the tools that come with it. I have the practice scene open, and let's start with this little archway. Press F9 to activate the add-on, and I'm going to use wear and tear LP. And if you do not have the automatic start active, nothing will happen until you press OK. So I'll accept the defaults and press OK. I usually like to turn on the frame edges option also. If I turn off the wireframe here, with the frame edges you add a little extra inset on the n-gons that are generated, and you can control the inset like this, and also you can control its depth. As you can see, it's processing all the stones at the same time. This is actually a single object. Now you might prefer to work on a single stone at a time. And to do that, all you have to do is just position the 3D cursor by shift right clicking on any of the stones, and then turn on loose part near cursor option. And you can now control all the settings only on that particular stone. And once you're satisfied with the single stone, you can turn off this option, and those settings will be applied to the entire object. And occasionally, although it mostly works quite well, you will have a piece of stone maybe like this that doesn't like those settings so much. So to fix that, select the object again, position the 3D cursor on that stone, and press F9, and this time we are going to restore only that stone. Choose restore and select loose part near cursor option. And now let's do that stone separately. Press F9 and choose wear and tear LP again, and this time select loose part near cursor. Not bad at all. Maybe we can adjust the inset a bit more to make it closer to the rest of the stones. And let's turn off the wireframes, and here it is. Wear and tear LP creates some kind of a stylized look that I personally quite like. Now let's try it on another wall. Press F9. Again, I'm going to use wear and tear LP, and let's reset. Press OK and turn on frame edges. The thing about wear and tear LP is that it is approximately 10 times faster than all other alternative methods. Let's restore this. This time the entire object, and instead let's use wear and tear HP or high poly. If you'd like to apply the wear and tear to each brick separately and not just the boundaries of the main object, simply select the individual button here. It'll be a little slower, but now you have the wear and tear effects on each brick separately. Again, I recommend, especially with this one, to use the loose part near cursor option for speedy interaction. Let's say position the cursor on one of the bricks, select loose part near cursor option, and adjust the settings. And let's say we like this. Simply turn off loose part near cursor. Those settings will be applied to the entire geometry. Now, I'm going to restore this object, and so we can do a comparison between the two types of wear and tear. With the object selected, press F9 again. Again, I'll start with wear and tear LP, and let's restore the settings just in case. And I'm going to turn on frame edges again. As you can see, it's very fast. It can process multiple brick walls very quickly. You can see how interactive it is. I'm doing this real time. Now, I'll go a bit into detail of the controls. Let's start with the defaults. The obvious selection here is the wear amount. You can control how much wear the object gets by simply using that slider. It also works in conjunction with the smooth button here. They will provide different looks. The default smooth of 0.5 usually I find quite suitable for most. there's obviously a random algorithm going on here. You can change the seed to get a different pattern. And let's turn on frame edges again. You notice that edge length threshold controller here. It subdivides all edges that are longer than this threshold value. Let's focus on one of the bricks here. And if I reduce this value, you'll see that it'll get more subdivisions and a different pattern of wear. And that can increase. As I increase it, I'll get less and less of. And yeah, it can go kind of ugly results like this when it runs out of edges to subdivide. So a certain amount of subdivision gives the best results. And the resolution basically multiplies this effect. As you increase it, you'll get more and more damage effects. The wear ratio is ratio between how many of the edges are processed for damage and how many of them are left alone. So 0.5 is basically 50% of the existing edges will receive damage and the remaining 50% will be left alone. So if I reduce this value, there'll be fewer and fewer edges processed. And if I increase this, let's go all the way to 1, and yeah, now all edges are processed. That's kind of boring that way. So the ratio of 0.5 usually is best suited for most. And noise scale is, as you would imagine, how much noise or randomness applied. When it comes to frame edges, it essentially creates an inset on the n-gon shapes that are created after the subdivisions. Now the first slider here, minimum number of edges. This simply means that the minimum number of edges are required on an n-gon before it's processed. So if I reduce this, any face that has 4 or above will have framing applied. If I increase this, then the number will go down. As you can see now, this face receives an inset, but this doesn't because it doesn't have enough edges. You can control how much inset is applied, like this. So be careful, small values go a long way. And then the depth. This is how much the n-gon faces are offset. You can create quite different looks with these. Let's increase this a little uncomfortable levels, and I'll turn off loose part and maybe turn off the wireframe. So here it is. Maybe it's a little too much. So I'm going to reset these values, restore the defaults. As I use this depth value, some of the faces are not always as flat as they can be. So you can turn on flat option on and off, and you can see the difference it makes. So let's push this back. And also we have this quads option underneath. If you don't really care for massive n-gons, you can turn that on. It'll create quads inside the n-gon faces. And sometimes I also turn on dissolve. So it actually kind of work against each other, but you know, if there are too many edges and you just simply wanted to have some, you can control these here. We also have corners option. This will also process the corners of your bricks, and this is probably a little too much. And then also let's reduce the frame inset. And if I turn this off, with only the corners on, you will get only the corners processed. And you can have it together with the edges, and it will make a slight difference. And you can see some of the corners here being processed. Now, as you can see, with all these insets and depth and all that stuff, we are actually changing the volume of the objects. And if you'd like to keep the original volume as close as possible, simply turn on keep volume button. This will flatten all the depth values, but it'll keep the volume. And the sharp edge angle is, as you probably guessed, the add-on is automatically selecting all the sharp edges to process, so you can control the edge angle. Default is 30 degrees. Anything above that value will be caught and processed. If you increase this above, let's say 90 degrees, then nothing will be caught and processed. So yeah, with the more complex geometry, you can also control which edges receive damage using this. The Keep Surface Detail button under Frame Edges is designed for objects that has subdivided faces that you would like to keep. Now let's look at this one more time. This time I'm going to apply Wear and Tear HP, and let's restore the defaults and click OK and turn on individual. Since interaction with this one is a little slower, especially if you have a complex geometry, so I'm going to turn on Loose Part Near Cursor. I'm going to skip cavities for now. So if you turn on edges, you'll get damage on the edges. This actually is a bit misleading. It will actually apply damage to the surfaces themselves too. Like before, the wear slider controls the overall wear amount. The first slider next to edges is the depth of the damage. As you can see, as I increase, depth is also increasing. And the contrast controls the contrast between the damaged and undamaged areas. Where there is a hollow area, it'll get hollower, and where flatter areas will get flatter. Detail size controls these damaged cells. So the smaller values will give you finer detail, but you might need to increase the wear as the approximations also change with more vertices to process. And of course, a smaller detail size also slows things down a bit. And so do not reduce it too much unless you need to. And the texture size controls the size of the details of the texture. As I increase it, you'll get smoother and smoother values, and as I decrease it, you get more like a noise pattern. Underneath texture size, we have the exact button. Occasionally when you're applying wear and tear, you'll get some parts of the geometry that fail to process or creates bad geometry. And in those cases, you might want to turn on exact. It doesn't guarantee that it'll solve the problem, but sometimes it helps. But also it's very slow. And smooth shading simply turns on smooth shading or not. Texture transform does what you imagine it would. You can control the placement of the texture. With these noise texture, it doesn't necessarily make a big difference, but occasionally when you have a bad geometry and you can't solve it with any of the controls above, sometimes just sliding the texture around will fix it. You can also use texture scale and rotation to create interesting patterns. You can also choose different texture types. Next, let's take a look at Mortar and Plaster. Select the wall object, press F9, choose Mortar. And this will create mortar between the bricks inside the gaps. The inset amount determines how much the mortar recedes from the surface. So if I reduce the value to almost near zero, the mortar will be nearly level with the surface. Instead, if I increase it, it will sink further and further into the wall. And the bulge determines how much mortar bulges outwards. Detail size is same as before, determines how fine the generated mesh will be. So the smaller values will mean finer detail. The optimize slider reduces the detail where it is not needed. As I increase it, more and more polygons will be reduced. And we also have a simple mortar option. This is faster to process, and it's also less prone to problems. If I click simple, we will just get a simple geometry. And the first slider is gap size. It controls how wide a gap between the bricks can the mortar bridge. So if I reduce this, you'll see that it's having a hard time with some of them because this gap is a little larger than the threshold. So therefore no mortar is created there. Or I can increase it more to cover larger areas. Next, Plaster. Select the wall object and press F9 and choose Plaster. The spread slider here determines how much of the wall is covered. Simply increase or decrease it to get bigger or smaller coverage. Also, it is smart enough to recognize if the wall object has mortar. Outset determines how much thickness the plaster gains, and right next to it we have the fixed folds button. As you can see, as you increase the thickness, there will be some folds forming. So if you don't want to see that, you can click on this button and it'll smooth everything out. It also adds a little to computation, so use it when necessary. And lower offset values actually gives this nice worn out plaster feel as it exposes the corners of the object. Detail size is the same as all others. Let me turn off optimize first. Smaller values means finer detail. As I increase this, processing becomes faster, but also we lose more of the detail. Optimize button next to it tries to optimize the polygon count by reducing unneeded polygons. Noise scale determines how large the noise pattern is. Smaller values will generate more noise-like. Larger ones will start looking more and more like a cloud pattern. The noise softness slider softens the resulting geometry. I think it's best demonstrated in this what I call the Plaster Planet object. Wear and Tear HP comes with Grunge option. And it's very easy to use. Simply activate Wear and Tear HP and choose cavities. You can optionally turn off edges if you only wanted the cavities. Increasing the amount will increase the amount of grunge you get. The grunge object is created separately, so if you choose to, you can delete it. Both Wear and Tear tools, LP and HP, work on multiple objects as well as single composite objects. So these bricks are all separate objects. You can select them all, press F9, and let's say we choose Wear and Tear HP. And let's restore the presets. There you have it. Or let's undo this and press F9, Wear and Tear LP, and the same idea. And they are still separate objects. If you own Wear and Tear, Damage Control or above, you also own SketchNCarve Core, which means you not only can build an entire model, but also cut cracks into it. SketchNCarve Core comes with a number of presets. One of them is the crack preset. From the drop-down menu, select the crack preset and align the camera to the angle that you would like to cut. Then simply draw some strokes that go across the object. When you press K, each stroke will turn into a crack cutting across your object. If you'd like to limit the cuts to a certain part of the object, simply position the 3D cursor by shift right clicking on a loose part and select loose option from the menu. If needed, you can also remove unwanted parts from your object. You can manipulate the cracks any way you want by rotating, scaling, or using any one of the numerous tools that come with SketchNCarve. If you happen to own full SketchNCarve, there are additional tools to manipulate the cracks, like tapered lines or open-ended cracks. And I'll leave it at that for SketchNCarve for now, as it's a very big add-on to be covered here in a few minutes. With Wear and Tear, full damage control also comes Sketch and Simulate SE. Usage is very simple. Press F9 as usual and select Sketch and Simulate. Choose Rigid Body Simulate, and since our object is a composite object made up of multiple bricks, we would like them to be separated, so click Separate Loose Parts. And also add ground object, so we will have a surface for the pieces to fall onto. Press OK, OK again, and you're done. And press play. In some cases, you might also want to modify your simulation. Let's say we simulated this arch, and when I play, pretty much the whole thing gets destroyed by the end of the scene. And instead, I'd like some of these bricks to stay as they were. So all you have to do is just select the pieces that you would like stationary, maybe add a few more here. Deselect the ground, of course. Press F9 again, select Sketch and Simulate, And this time, since we are modifying it, select Rigid Body Modify. I'm going to deactivate the selected object, so select Active Passive button and choose Passive. With this, everything that's selected here will become a passive rigid body object. Now let's go back again. Now, this is a bit more like it. Now let's say we would like to keep the final pose as a still frame. And it's also quite easy to do. Simply go to the frame that you'd like to freeze. It could even be one of these. Select all the objects that you'd like to freeze and deselect the ground object. And press F9, select Sketch and Simulate, and this time select Apply Rigid Body and click OK. And OK again. Now all the selected objects are frozen in place. Rigid body animation is applied and the pose is frozen. And that's all for now. If you'd like to find out about future tutorials, make sure to like and subscribe, and most importantly, follow me on Twitter. See you next time.